This conference will now be recorded.
Hello. Thank you for joining us here on the Year 50 CDBG Public Input Meeting. We do have several participants on the call, and we're just going to give it another few seconds for anybody else to log in that might be interested, and then we will get started.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, I think we will get going here. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We are here to discuss the Community Development Block Grant Year 50 public input process. So we'll give you a little bit of background on CDBG, and then we will give you the opportunity to comment. So what is Community Development Block Grant? It's a program that's been around since about 1974. It's authorized by Congress, and it is a program that is primarily intended to benefit low and moderate income households, residents, and businesses in the community. It's what's called often an entitlement program, meaning that the city, as long as it continues to submit the plan and submit the reports and follow the rules, is guaranteed to get some amount of money every year. There is, however, no guarantee of how much money will be received every year. So there has been a lot of variability with that over time, and currently the city is receiving just a little more than half of what originally it received in CDBG. So as costs have gone up over time and need has gone up over time, unfortunately, the actual dollars have gone down, as well as the purchasing cost of the dollars. With inflation and things like that since 1974, things are very different. So what can CDBG funding be used for? CDBG can be used to address a variety of needs, and it is a flexible program within the requirements that were set by Congress. So as I mentioned, the primary responsibility of the Community Development Block Grant is to serve low and moderate income persons, whether that is through direct benefit to those persons, whether it's creating jobs, improving neighborhoods, all of those kinds of things. But there is a requirement that at least 70% of the funding does have to be spent to benefit low and moderate income residents of the city. The other objective of the program is to prevent or eliminate slums or blight. Now, those are not phrases that we use in the modern world, but you have to remember that this program goes back to 1974, and it still has a lot of language that we wouldn't necessarily use today. So we are using the language that HUD uses, but probably today we would use a phrase like disinvestment or deterioration more so than we would use the phrases there. But those are actually the phrases that are in the law. And then the third national objective of the CDBG program is urgent community development needs. Usually that is as a result of a natural disaster. So you see this being used a lot in parts of the country that have hurricanes and mudslides and wildfires. It isn't something that typically Midwestern cities are able to take advantage of. And there's quite a bit of requirements that go along with that. So, most of the CDBG that is spent nationwide is in the first two categories, benefiting low and moderate income persons or preventing or eliminating slums and blight. So when we talk about low and moderate income people, what are we saying? A lot of people, I think that low and moderate income is a very different number than it is in the HUD definition. So it is encompassing everybody who makes anything from zero all the way up to 80% of the median family income. So these are published every year by HUD. They do a calculation based on census data and surveys, and they come up with what they think the median family income is. And then CDBG is intended to address anybody who, primarily people who are 80% of that median family income and lower. So if you look there on the first line, it goes by household size. So a household size of one would be considered 30% of median family income if they made up to $17,950. They'd be considered up to 50% median family income if they made $29,900 or less. And they'd be considered 80% or less if they made less than 47,800. And that's a pretty high number. So a lot of times what we're talking about with these programs are people who are very low income, people living on Social Security disability, but it also goes up to people who are working. A single person just graduating from college, $47,800 would be an amazing salary for that. These are also people who are our service workers that work in schools, that work in, hotels and restaurants. I mean, they're out there working and earning wages and decent wages in a lot of cases, but they would still by HUD be considered to be 80% median family income or less, and therefore they would be eligible for the program. So the program does not preference any particular income level, one over the other, except that 80% is the limit. So there's no additional points or benefit for being extra low income or extra high income. Everyone under that threshold is treated equally. So when it comes to Davenport's Community Development Block Grant, as I mentioned, we are guaranteed to get money every year as long as the rules are continued to be followed, but there's no guarantee of the particular dollar amount. Currently, we receive a little over $1 million. At the high point of the Community Development Block Grant Program, which was back in 2002, the city received over $2.2 million. So it is quite a difference over time. How does the CDBG program get administered? There are city staff here, myself included, who cover the program, who make sure that all of the planning at the front end gets done, that all of the reporting at the back end gets done, and all of the required steps in between are done. So we use the funds for only eligible activities. That will cover what some of those are as we go forward. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, all funded activities must meet one of the national objectives. There's no category of funding that would be eligible if it didn't meet one of those eligible national objectives. And currently, the city funds a whole variety of subrecipient agencies that serve low and moderate income residents. So this is anything from youth programs to senior programs, transportation programs, housing, economic development, infrastructure, mental health services, homeless services, all different variety of things are funded through CDBG currently. And so the requirement is that you would need to be a city department or an eligible 501c3 to be able to access funding. And today we aren't here to discuss who will be funded. We're here to talk about categories of things. So that's important to remember as we go forward through the presentation here today. And that is that, at this stage of the game, we're planning for the program year that begins July 1st of 2024. So we've barely just begun our current program year here in 2023, but this public input will apply to applications for funding that will go into effect next year in July of 2024. So at this stage of the game, we're looking at what is it that are current needs in the community. The other thing to remember is that the planning process encompasses a 5-year process, and the year that we're funding for, we're gathering public input for, is going to be the 5th year in a 5-year process. So back at the beginning of that 5-year process, we did a consolidated plan, and it identified what the general needs were in the community, and then each annual plan within that 5-year plan kind of follow after what those identified needs were. And then each year we kind of go out and take the temperature and see what is it that, are the needs identified in that consolidated plan still valid? Are there other things that have popped up in the interim that maybe possibly could be addressed? Are there more intense needs? They're the same needs that we've had, but maybe there's just more of them. So that's the type of public input that we're gathering at this stage. We're not at the stage where we would be saying, an individual person or entity or activity would be funded with this funding at this time. So throughout the presentation, you'll see a map that looks like this. So we're gathering two kinds of input of what we need, what is needed in the community, but also where it is needed. So you can see that this is a map of Davenport. The CDBG funding can only be used to address needs of Davenport residents. Presumably neighboring cities who receive this funding, which are Rock Island and Moline, will be having similar input opportunities, and they can address how their funding would be used. But here today we're discussing only Davenport funding, and so that's why you see only a map of Davenport. And you see that the map is divided into 4 areas. They're just labeled for convenience, A, B, C, and D. And I have gotten the question in the past of why these quadrants. I can tell you the east-west division goes along Kimberly, and that is primarily based on the age of the housing stock. Kind of below that line, the housing tends to be a little bit older, and above that line, the housing tends to be a little bit newer. And then the north-south divider is, Brady Street or Highway 61, and that's just kind of, I think, the commonly accepted divider between east and west. That's where the addresses divide between east and west, and so that's why that was chosen. So as we go through the input, we'll go through different categories of eligible activities, and so we do ask that you participate via the chat. We'll gather that information and take it back and use it in the planning process. And so we'll be asking primarily 2 questions. What are the kinds of things that we need in this category, and where are these things needed, more particularly? If there is a geographic component, some things maybe we just need everywhere. Very sensitive. There. So the first category that we're going to cover is housing programs. And when I say category, these are categories of eligible activities set by HUD. So HUD is, the funding is limited in what it can do. It can cover 4 primary areas, and that is housing, economic development, infrastructure, and public services. And so we have a set of slides for each of those categories, which are HUD-defined categories. So first, we'll talk about housing. Housing programs are the types of activities that support housing. This can be homeownership through the form of down payment assistance or rehabilitation of existing housing for people that own or people that rent. It can be the production of rental housing. There are a lot of requirements around that, but it's something that is eligible under CDBG on a rehab basis. And other activities that come in connection with housing. So these can be things like housing counseling and financial counseling. So these are types of things that HUD would categorize as housing activities. So currently, we have an owner occupied rehab program. So people who currently own their homes but are low income and need help with furnaces and roofs. It also covers accessibility. So a person that would like to stay in their home but has physical needs, such as a wheelchair ramp or lift or an accessible shower, those are the kinds of things that are funded in this category. Also, down payment assistance for low to moderate income households that are looking to purchase a home. And then the Urban Homestead Program, which is acquiring and rehabbing homes to be sold to low income residents. So those are current types of programs, just as examples of things that are funded with CDBG. And so, in terms of the public input, our question at the moment would be what types of housing development or redevelopment does Davenport need at this time? And as I mentioned, you can participate via the chat. That way, we are generating a transcript that can be referred to in the future. And I'll just give it another minute. I see we do have one comment that has come in, but I do want to give everyone an opportunity. So I'll give it about another minute. Okay. And then the next question on this slide is where would you like to see this type of housing development or housing programs and activities located in Davenport? And the map is there for reference, labeled A, B, C, and D. Are there particular areas that need more attention? And in those areas, what type of attention do they need? And I'll just give it a few more seconds here. Again, if you have a particular opinion about the location of where assistance is needed, this would be a time to reference that area. Okay, so we'll move to the next category, and that is economic development. Um, Economic development, again, is an eligible category for CDBG according to HUD. And this is things that can be done to support business development, job creation, technical assistance, and commercial type of rehabilitation. And remember that the national objective still applies. So these have to be businesses and jobs that primarily benefit people who are low and moderate income residents of Davenport. So these would be either owners of businesses who are themselves low and moderate income, who need assistance to get their business started, to expand a business they already have, or it would be a person of any income, but who is creating jobs that would employ people who, at the time they take the job, are low and moderate income. It does not mean, it's a often misconceived idea that the only jobs that can be created with CDBG are jobs that are going to be low mod. That's incorrect. The person, when they take the job, would be a low mod person, but obviously the job, we would hope and intend that it would pay them, enough money or more money so they are working their way towards no longer being a low mod income person. So examples of this type of program would be a small business loan program that is currently in operation for small business owners who are low and moderate income or who are creating jobs that are for low moderate income people. Also, in terms of revitalization, facade programs. So businesses that are in low and moderate income areas and neighborhoods that maybe need some physical improvement on the outside could apply and potentially get some assistance to improve the physical condition of their building. And so the questions here are the same. So what type of economic development or what sorts of economic development are needed in Davenport? And then the second add-on question would be, according to the map, where is that development or assistance most needed? And again, I will just leave it another minute or so, giving everyone the opportunity to respond to economic development needs in Davenport, both what is needed and where it is needed. Okay, we'll move now to the third category, and that is infrastructure improvement. What is eligible under CDBG in terms of infrastructure? These would be publicly owned facilities, so usually things in the right of way, like streets, playgrounds, utilities, sidewalks, lighting, things like that. It can also be things like community centers or senior centers if they're open to the public and meet certain requirements. So these can be things that are considered infrastructure. Another type of infrastructure improvement is Uh, Again, going back to that concept, outdated concept of slum and blight removal would be demolition. So if there are abandoned homes or abandoned buildings that are dangerous to public health and safety, CDBG is a funding source that could be used to demolish those buildings. So things that are currently being done to support infrastructure, there's a category called infrastructure in support of affordable housing. So if a developer is working on affordable rental project that's being assisted, for example, with tax credits, the city might be able to assist with some infrastructure improvements around that building. For example, we funded a senior apartment building several years ago, and the sidewalks needed assistance around that building, anticipating that there would be seniors there, maybe using wheelchairs or walkers that would need a smoother sidewalk, and that also would need accessible sidewalk crossing corners. And so CDBG was able to assist with that as a type of infrastructure that supports the development of affordable housing. Another example, as I mentioned, would be demolition. If there are buildings that would meet certain criteria that could potentially be health and safety hazards, CDBG may be able to assist with demolishing a building. And so I will provide some time to answer our very familiar by now questions, which are what type of infrastructure improvements would you like to see in the area, and where in the city would you expect that would be needed the most? So that would be any type of infrastructure, again, in the public right of way, streets, sidewalks, sewers, lighting, that sort of thing. Dilapidated buildings, areas in need of community facilities like community centers or things of that nature. And I'll just provide a minute or two on this category. And just a few more seconds on this one, and we'll move to the final category. And the final category that is eligible for CDBG funding would be what we call public services. So public services would be things that are more program based than physical based. So if you think of some of the things we've talked about so far, we've talked about physical improvements to housing, we've talked about physical improvements to neighborhoods through infrastructure, we've talked about loans and grants to businesses, and that can include physical components to create the business or expand the business or renovate it. Public services are not the physical components or bricks and mortar components of CDBG. Public services are programs and activities that provide services to low and moderate income residents of Davenport. Oftentimes, these are youth services, seniors, homeless services, mental health, domestic violence, transportation. The list can go on and on. Housing counseling, financial literacy counseling, any different kinds of, if you think of a program where a person comes in and they don't receive money, they receive a service or a benefit, that would probably be a public service. And these would be where you would kind of traditionally think of nonprofit organizations coming in. So, these would be your homeless service providers, your youth service providers, your senior service providers, all of which are nonprofit. Um, so currently, the city funds a wide variety of these kinds of programs. These are grants that are available to eligible nonprofit agencies, as long as they provide eligible direct services to low and moderate income residents. The other thing to note about the grants is that they're competitive. So there's an application period that comes up later this year. That will be late November, early December, with applications due in January. And also, unfortunately, this is a category that HUD has put a limit on. There is a cap to what can be spent on public services, no more than 15% of the grant. So if you think about a grant of about $1 million, you're talking about $150,000 would be 10% of it. So usually right around 200-ish is what we're uh, contributing towards public services. So it's not the lion's share of the grant. It is limited by HUD, but it does tend to be a competitive category specifically because the funds are limited. So currently there's a wide variety of agencies that are funded. And so with this, the same questions, which are what types of public services do your customers or clients or participants or friends and family members that you're working with now, what types of services do you think that they're needing that they're not finding out there in the community, or that exist in the community but there isn't enough capacity in those services for them? And then where in the city should additional services or additional capacity be located? And we'll just give a few more seconds on this category. Okay. Um, and the chat is still open. So any final thoughts or comments that you want to make that you weren't able to make in any of the categories, now would be the time to make those. Um, and while you kind of summarize any thoughts that you may want to add, I just do want to mention there are other ways to participate in the public input process, and that is we have a survey that's out at the moment. It's available at the link shown here. Um, it's a shortened link, so it should be easy to type. It's www.surveymonkey.com/r/Davenport CDBG 2023. And that survey is going to remain open until Thursday, September 28th. So it'll be open about 6 weeks altogether by the time we're done, and about 8 weeks, closer to actually. And so we'll take those surveys. We usually get several hundred. And I do want to emphasize spread that link around. We've sent it out to nonprofit service providers, elected officials, the school districts, just about any uh, entity that we have an email address for. It's also being promoted publicly through the city's libraries. Paper copies are available at all city buildings. If you would like paper copies provided to you, to your agency, for your clients, we can print them and bring them to you. and you can use them that way. Um, uh, we're open to suggestion about ways to get the survey out. Please do share it widely with your clients, your friends and family members, your personal and professional networks. And if you didn't get a chance to comment in the chat, or if you have a comment you would prefer not to place in the chat, or this session is being recorded and will be placed on the city's website for anyone to comment that couldn't make the meeting today. So if you're watching this as a recording rather than a live session, if you would like to provide a comment, please do feel free to email us. You can email those comments to ced.info@davenportiowa.com. And again, that has the same closing date as the survey, which is September 28th of 2023. And with that, that concludes our formal process of public input here. But as we have mentioned, there are other opportunities to comment. I'll leave the chat open for another minute or two if there's any last comments anyone wants to add. But do remember that you can email us at cedinfo@davenportiowa.com. You can also give us a call at the number shown there on the screen, 563-326-7765. We'll leave it open for just another minute or so, and then we will conclude today's presentation.